In less than a year, I lost $450,000, my home, and the woman I loved. And the sickest part? I paid for every cent of my own destruction with a smile on my face. I wasn't robbed. I was seduced. I thought I was buying a ticket to paradise, but in reality, I was funding the construction of my own cell in hell. This story is a map of my disaster. It's about how loneliness can blind you, and how a dream sold by the right person can become the weapon that destroys your life. If you think this could never happen to you, then you're exactly the kind of person I used to be. How does a man with a solid plan, a man who built a successful career and saved diligently for 40 years, end up here? How do you go from planning your legacy to begging for a couch to sleep on? It didn't start with a demand for a house or a grand business investment. It didn't start with any red flags you could see from a mile away. It started with a simple, innocent-sounding message online from a woman whose smile seemed to promise the exact opposite of this empty, silent room. It felt like destiny, like the universe was finally handing me the reward for a life of hard work. And that belief right there was my first and most expensive mistake. Before the Philippines, my life wasn't a life. It was a schedule. I'd wake up at 6 a.m., drive the same gray highway to a job where I managed spreadsheets, and then drive home to a house that was too quiet. My divorce years earlier hadn't been a fiery explosion. It was more like a slow leak, where all the warmth and noise seeped out until there was nothing left but empty rooms and paid-off furniture. I was a ghost in my own home, rattling the chains of a life I had meticulously built, but had forgotten how to live. Each day was a carbon copy of the last, a faded photocopy of a man who once had dreams. At work, I was just part of the machinery, a reliable component that would one day be replaced. In public, I was invisible, just another gray-haired man buying groceries for one. The checkout girls looked right through me. I'd walk through the park and see families, young couples, life happening in vibrant color all around me, while my own world felt like it was filmed in black and white. You start to feel like you're not really there at all, just a spectator watching the world from behind a thick pane of glass. It's a profound kind of loneliness, the kind that makes you wonder if you'd leave a hole if you were gone. My house wasn't a home. It had become a waiting room for death. It was clean, orderly, and sterile, a place where you sit and wait for your number to be called. The television was my only companion, its manufactured dramas a poor substitute for real human connection. Weekends were the longest days, 2 vast, empty stretches of time to be filled with chores and aimless wandering. I had done everything I was supposed to do. I worked hard, I saved, I was responsible. But I had engineered a life with no joy, a retirement plan with no pulse. The silence was deafening. My net worth was a cruel joke. I had this impressive number on a statement, a testament to 40 years of discipline. But what could it buy me? A bigger, emptier house? A fancier car to drive to the same soulless job? It felt like a mountain of wood pellets with no stove to burn them in. The money was supposed to be for a future, for a someday, when I would finally enjoy the fruits of my labor with someone. But that someone was gone, and someday was turning into never. My wealth wasn't a comfort. It was a constant, glaring reminder of everything I didn't have. It was on one of those long, quiet Tuesday nights, scrolling through the internet with no real purpose, that the first spark appeared. I stumbled upon a forum, then a blog, then a series of YouTube videos. They were all about men like me, men my age who had escaped the gray. They were in Thailand, Costa Rica, the Philippines. They were smiling, holding hands with beautiful women, drinking beer on the beach. They talked about a life where you were respected, where your money went far, and where you weren't invisible anymore. For the first time in years, a dangerous thought crept in. What if there was a way out of the waiting room? That first video was a lifeline tossed into the gray ocean of my existence. It was a 5-minute tour of a town called Dumaguete, filmed by a man about my age. He wasn't just showing the scenery, he was showing a life. He walked through a bustling market, nodding to vendors who knew his name. He sat on a plastic chair at a roadside stall, eating a meal that cost him less than $2, laughing with the locals. He talked about his pension going 3, 4, even 5 times further. He wasn't a ghost. He was somebody. The Philippines wasn't just a place on a map anymore. It was an escape route, a shimmering oasis in the vast, sterile desert of my life. From there, I fell down a rabbit hole of research that felt more like a hopeful excavation. I devoured every article, every forum post, every cost of living breakdown. I learned that my $450,000 wasn't just a comfortable retirement fund, it was a fortune. It was the key to a kingdom where I could build a beautiful house, afford help, travel, and never worry about a utility bill again. More importantly, every story echoed the same refrain about the culture. The people were warm, the family was central, and older Western men were not seen as expired or invisible, but as respected figures, valued for their stability and experience. It was everything I wasn't in America. The fantasy began to crystallize, to grow flesh and bone. I wasn't just escaping the gray, I was running toward a vibrant Technicolor future. I imagined myself walking on a warm beach, the water lapping at my ankles. I pictured a small, simple home, not a sterile monument to loneliness, but a place filled with the noise of life and the smell of cooking. In this vision, I wasn't just a retiree. I was the patriarch, the provider, the man of the house who was looked up to. This dream wasn't just about making my money last. It was about finally starting to live. The decision, when it came, felt less like a choice and more like an awakening. The question was no longer if, but how. And how had a very specific, crucial component. The men in the videos weren't just happy because of the weather or the prices. They were happy because they had someone. They had a partner, a wife, a family. I knew I couldn't just move to the other side of the world alone. I'd just be trading one form of isolation for another. So I took the next logical step. I signed up for an international dating site, the same one mentioned in half a dozen forums. My profile was honest. I said I was a simple, stable man looking for a serious partner to build a new life with in the Philippines. The response was overwhelming, a flood of attention so intense it was almost disorienting after years of feeling invisible. I scrolled through dozens of profiles, pretty faces blurring together, until one stopped me cold. Her name was Joyce. She was 28, and her profile picture wasn't a glamorous selfie, but a simple, unadorned photo where she was genuinely smiling, her eyes full of a light that seemed impossibly bright. Her first message to me wasn't a compliment or a request. It was a simple question that no one had asked me in years. She just asked how my day was. That simple question, how was your day, was the key that unlocked everything. Our chats became the one bright spot in my grayscale life. Every morning I'd wake up to a string of messages she'd sent while I was sleeping, full of details about her world, the sound of the roosters, the smell of street food, the jokes her cousins made. For the first time in decades, someone was interested in the mundane details of my existence. I wasn't just a manager of spreadsheets anymore. I was my John, a man whose commute, lunch, and boring meetings were topics of fascination for a beautiful woman halfway across the world. The loneliness didn't seep out of my life. It was violently expelled, replaced by the constant, addictive glow of my phone screen. The 3 months of daily video calls felt like a courtship from a bygone era, intense and wonderfully focused. We didn't talk about my money, we talked about our dreams. She wanted a simple life, a family, a husband she could take care of and respect. I wanted a life, period. The distance didn't feel like a barrier. It felt like a temporary inconvenience, a final test before the real story could begin. Every call ended with her shyly saying, "I love you," and my heart, a dormant muscle for so long, would ache with a feeling I thought was gone forever. It was a perfect script, and I was memorizing my lines, preparing for the first act. I booked a flight. Landing in Manila was a sensory overload, but all of it faded into the background the moment I saw her. She was even more beautiful than in her photos, smaller and more delicate. When she ran to me and threw her arms around my neck, burying her face in my chest, it wasn't the awkward greeting of two strangers meeting for the first time. It felt like a homecoming. In that crowded, chaotic airport, under the flickering fluorescent lights, I wasn't an old, invisible man anymore. I was the hero of the story, the one she had been waiting for, and the weight of her embrace felt more real and more valuable than the $450,000 in my portfolio. Those first 2 weeks were a blur of idyllic moments, each one seemingly pulled from a movie. We walked hand in hand through crowded markets, and she'd bargain for fruit, her laughter echoing off the stalls. She'd proudly introduce me to everyone. "This is John, my love." They didn't see an old man with a young woman. They saw a respected couple, and their smiles were genuine. She'd rest her head on my shoulder on long bus rides, her presence a warm, constant reassurance against my side. I was spending money, of course, paying for every meal, every hotel, every little trinket she admired, but it didn't feel transactional. It felt like a privilege. It felt like I was finally using my money for its intended purpose, to create joy. The feeling of being young again was the most potent drug of all. She and her friends, all of them in their 20s, would listen intently to my stories about my life in America, their eyes wide with a mixture of respect and fascination. They made me feel worldly and wise, not old and obsolete. We'd sit at beachside bars, drinking cheap beer as the sun went down, and I'd feel the years just melt away. Joyce would trace the lines on my hand and tell me they were a map of a good life, a life that had led me to her. The age gap wasn't a chasm, it was a bridge. My experience in her youth felt like the perfect combination, two halves of a whole. Our time together was a movie montage of pure happiness. We took a boat to a tiny secluded island where we were the only people on the beach. She cooked for me in her family's small kitchen, a simple meal that tasted better than any expensive dinner I'd ever had. Her family treated me not as a guest, but as a returning king. Her mother called me son, and her father shook my hand with a firm, approving grip. It was a world away from the silent, empty rooms of my house back home. This was life in vibrant technicolor, and every frame was more perfect than the last. I was the romantic lead, and Joyce was the brilliant director, crafting every scene to be a masterpiece of affection. The intimacy we shared was something I hadn't known in 30 years. It wasn't just physical. It was a deep, soul-bearing connection that I craved more than air. She'd wake up before me and just watch me sleep, and when I'd open my eyes, she'd smile as if seeing me was the first gift of her day. She seemed to have no interest in my finances, only in me. When I offered to buy her a new phone because hers was old and cracked, she initially refused, saying my presence was the only gift she needed. Of course, I insisted. Seeing her face light up with gratitude over a simple $300 phone was a high I would have paid thousands to feel. I never once felt like a walking wallet or a sugar daddy. In my mind, I was the provider, the protector, a man fulfilling his natural role. When we passed a jewelry store and she gazed at a simple gold necklace, I didn't hesitate. Buying it for her wasn't about showing off my wealth. It was about adorning the woman who was making my life beautiful. Each purchase was a small investment in the dream, another brick in the foundation of the perfect life we were building together. I was the man of the house, the patriarch, and the cost was irrelevant because the return, her love, her devotion, her smile, felt infinite. I was playing the role of a lifetime in this perfect film. The day I had to leave was brutal. Leaving her at the airport was like tearing a part of myself away. Her tears weren't for show. They felt real, gut-wrenching sobs of a woman being separated from her other half. The flight back to my gray, silent life was the longest 14 hours I've ever endured. The empty house felt colder and more sterile than ever before. The schedule, the commute, the invisible life, it was all intolerable now. I had seen the other side. I had lived the dream. My mind was made up before the plane even landed. I wasn't going back for another visit. I was going back to stay forever. The next few months were a whirlwind of logistics, but my purpose was crystal clear. I put my house on the market. I met with my financial advisor to liquidate my portfolio. I filled out visa paperwork. Every step felt like a triumphant move toward my destiny. Joyce and I were on the phone every day, planning our future. We talked about the house we would build, a small, beautiful home near the beach. We talked about the children she wanted, a prospect that made me feel like my life was starting over, not ending. The numbers on my bank statements were no longer just digits. They were tangible pieces of our future home, our future life. I sold my house. I transferred hundreds of thousands of dollars into a new account, ready to be wired. I bought a one-way ticket. I was shedding my old gray skin and stepping into a new, vibrant existence. My friends and my ex-wife raised concerns, of course. They called it a midlife crisis, a fantasy, a mistake. But what did they know of the silence? What did they know of being a ghost? They couldn't see the movie I was living in. They couldn't feel the warmth of Joyce's love or see the light in her eyes. They were just jealous critics, watching from the cheap seats, unable to comprehend the masterpiece I was starring in. Now, sitting in this borrowed room, the silence is even louder than before. It's filled with the echoes of that laughter, the ghost of that touch, the memory of that perfect, sun-drenched dream. Every scene from that first trip plays back in my mind, but now I can see the stagehands just out of frame, the cue cards she was reading from. It was a perfect movie, a flawless performance. Looking back, I should have realized it was too good to be true, that scripts that perfect are always fiction. But I didn't want to see. I was so desperate to be the star that I never stopped to ask who had written the script or who was truly directing the show. My return to America was like stepping from a world of dazzling color back into a black and white film. The silence of my house was no longer just quiet. It was a smothering, oppressive void that Joyce's daily messages and calls were the only escape from. We were planning my permanent move, a triumphant return to the life and the woman I was meant to have. The first sign that the script was changing came about 2 weeks after I got back. It was a message, late at night, full of her usual love and affection, but ending with a single, worried sentence. Her mother's blood pressure was acting up again, and the medicine was more expensive than they had expected. It was only $150. In the grand scheme of my finances, it was less than a rounding error, a drop in an ocean. But to her, it was a source of immense stress. I saw it immediately, not as a red flag, but as my first real test as a provider. It was a chance to prove that my love wasn't just words spoken over a video call. It was tangible, real, and supportive. I sent the money instantly, feeling a surge of masculine pride. This is what a man does. He takes care of his family. And Joyce's family was my future. Her tearful gratitude over the phone was worth 10 times the amount. A week later, another crisis erupted. Her younger brother, the smart one with so much promise, was on the verge of being dropped from his college classes over an unpaid tuition balance. It was $300. Joyce was beside herself with shame and worry, feeling she was failing him. I saw the situation clearly. I wasn't just sending money. I was investing in the family's future. My future. Helping her brother succeed would benefit all of us in the long run. I was being the patriarch, the steady hand that guided the family toward a better life. So I sent it, and my justification was immediate and solid. Education was the foundation of everything. The next request came with pictures. A typhoon had passed by, and their roof was now leaking badly into the living area. The photos of buckets on the floor and a damp, stained ceiling made the problem feel urgent and concrete. The quote for the repair was $500. I didn't hesitate. A man provides a safe, dry home for his loved ones. From thousands of miles away, I could still be their protector, the one who kept the rain out. Each dollar I sent felt like a brick in the foundation of the respect and love they already showed me. I wasn't a walking wallet. I was fulfilling my duty. I glanced at my bank account, the one I had designated for our new life in the Philippines. The total hadn't changed much, but I could see the little withdrawals, a series of small debits. I pictured my savings not as a number on a screen, but as a vast reservoir of water, deep and still, accumulated over 40 years of discipline. These payments were just tiny hairline fissures in the dam wall. They were structurally insignificant, too small to ever cause a real problem. The integrity of the dam was still absolute. The logic was sound, a comforting thought that pushed back against any flicker of doubt. Then came the toothache. Joyce confessed she'd been enduring a terrible pain in her molar for weeks, too afraid to tell me because she didn't want to be a burden. Now it was unbearable, and the dentist said she needed a root canal. The cost was $400. The thought of that beautiful, radiant smile being dimmed by pain was something I couldn't stand. This wasn't an abstract family problem. This was her, my Joyce, suffering. Taking that pain away felt like the most fundamental expression of love. My money was a tool, and its highest purpose was to ensure her well-being and happiness. A few days later, a new kind of request appeared, one framed as a strategic investment. Joyce's cousin had the opportunity for a good-paying job on a construction crew, but he needed a specific safety certification that cost $250. With this certificate, he could finally secure a stable income and help support the family. It wasn't a handout, it was a hand up. It was a logical step toward making the family more self-sufficient, which would ultimately lessen the burden on us. It felt like a smart business decision, a way of helping them help themselves, and my role was that of a savvy investor seeding a promising venture. Our video calls were my lifeline, but the connection had been getting worse, pixelated and cutting out. With a heavy heart, Joyce explained her prepaid data plan was a constant struggle, and the reliable internet service needed for clear calls was a luxury she couldn't afford. It was $100 a month, a recurring expense. The thought of losing that clear daily vision of her face was intolerable. This wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. Our connection was the bedrock of our relationship, and I would pay whatever it cost to keep that line strong and clear. It was a utility bill for our love. My friend Mark asked me a simple question over a beer. "So, are you sending her money?" I felt a flash of anger, a defensive wall shooting up instantly. "I'm helping my future family. You wouldn't understand," I snapped. I realized in that moment I had begun to compartmentalize my actions. I wasn't lying, but I was curating the story for an outside audience. These small gestures of support were part of the sacred, private language of our love, and I felt a fierce need to protect it from the cynical judgment of those who couldn't possibly comprehend the depth of our connection. The stakes were raised when Joyce confided in me about a dark cloud hanging over her family, a debt of honor her father owed to a local lender. It was an old loan taken out years ago, and the accumulating interest was now a source of constant threat and shame. The lender was getting aggressive. The amount was $1,000. This wasn't a leaky roof. This was a dragon breathing down their necks. I saw my chance to be the knight who slayed it, to liberate them from fear and secure their loyalty and gratitude forever. I was buying her family's peace of mind, and in doing so, cementing my role as their savior. I did another check on the reservoir. The sum of the small fissures was no longer insignificant. It added up to several $1,000s. The trickle of water seemed louder now, a persistent, quiet sound in the back of my mind. A cold knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach for just a moment. Was this sustainable? But then I summoned the memory of Joyce's voice, her breathless, tearful gratitude after I cleared her father's debt. She called me her hero, her king. The anxiety wasn't a warning. It was just the fear of commitment, the natural cold feet any man gets before making the biggest and best decision of his life. With every problem solved, I felt more and more like the man I was always meant to be, the provider, the protector, the head of the family. My move was just weeks away, and the final logistics were falling into place. My old life was packed in boxes, and my new one was waiting. Then, a new message arrived from Joyce. The tone was different this time. It wasn't tinged with worry or crisis. It was pulsing with excitement. It was about an opportunity, a plan she had been developing for us. A business, she said, that would secure our future together forever. It started with a simple idea for a small Sorry store, and the seed money she suggested made everything I had sent before feel like pocket change. The idea for a simple Sorry store was just the appetizer. Over the next few days, Joyce unveiled the main course. It was a grander vision, one she said came to her in a dream. Why settle for a small store when they could build a real business, a legacy for their future children? She spoke of a small plot of land for sale near a popular tourist beach. They could build a few small bungalows, a quote-unquote mini resort for foreign visitors. She painted a picture of a life where they weren't just living, but thriving, with a steady stream of income that would make them wealthy and secure forever. I felt a jolt of alarm at the sheer scale of her ambition. This wasn't a few $100s for a roof or a tooth. This was serious capital. I voiced my concern, mentioning the risk, the amount of money it would take. But she was a master at turning my logic against me. She framed my caution not as prudence, but as a lack of faith in her, in us. The money in my American bank account was just sitting there, she argued, cold and sterile. Here, in the Philippines, it could be planted like a seed and grow into a beautiful fruit-bearing tree that would provide shade for our entire family. Then came the legal wrinkle, presented as a minor logistical hurdle. Since foreigners couldn't legally own land, she explained, the property deed would have to be in her name. She said it with such casual innocence, as if it were the most obvious and unimportant detail in the world. "But it is for us, my love," she whispered over the video call, her eyes wide and sincere. "My name on the paper is just a rule the government makes. In my heart, in God's eyes, it is our home, our business. We are one soul now, you and I." And I believed her, because I needed to. The vision she sold me was intoxicating. I wasn't just a 60-year-old retiree anymore. I was a business magnate, a property developer, building a tropical empire with the love of my life. I let myself get swept up in the fantasy, imagining the grand opening, greeting guests from Germany and Australia, watching Joyce manage the staff with a graceful, confident authority. The fear of the investment was drowned out by the roar of my own ego. This leap of faith wasn't a risk. It was my destiny, the grand, heroic act that would define the final, triumphant chapter of my life. She sent over the documents, a blurry photo of a supposed deed, a list of costs for materials and labor, and the bank details for the seller's account, which was, of course, her cousin's. The final number at the bottom of the list made my breath catch in my throat. $120,000. It was more than a quarter of everything I had. The reservoir wasn't just cracking. I was about to dynamite the dam. A cold sweat prickled my skin as I stared at the number. She must have seen the flicker of panic in my eyes, because her face immediately crumpled, tears welling up. "You don't trust me," she choked out. Her tears were the final weapon, the one I had no defense against. All my logic, all my caution, evaporated in the face of her pain. The thought of being the man who made her cry was more terrifying than losing the money. This was the final test. Passing it meant securing her love forever. Failing it meant proving myself to be just another faithless, untrusting foreigner. I took a steadying breath, the air feeling thin and sharp. "No, my love, of course I trust you. Completely." With my heart pounding against my ribs, I navigated to my bank's wire transfer portal, entered the 13-digit account number, and typed in the full amount. The moment I clicked confirm, the adrenaline didn't turn into relief. It curdled into a hollow, nauseous dread. My hands were shaking. I sent Joyce a short message. "It's done. The money is on its way." Her reply was almost instantaneous, a flood of emojis, hearts, champagne bottles, praying hands, and a dozen frantic, misspelled voice notes. She was screaming with joy, thanking God, thanking me, calling me her king, her savior, the father of her future children. It was a tidal wave of gratitude, so overwhelming and manic that it felt less like love and more like a victory celebration, the sound of a game just won. For the next 2 days, an eerie quiet settled in. After the initial explosion of joy, the constant stream of "Good morning, my love" messages and late-night calls abruptly stopped. When I asked, she said she was overwhelmingly busy, that securing the land and hiring workers was a full-time job. Her replies became short, distracted, full of logistical details that felt impersonal and cold. The intimate connection that had been the center of my universe was suddenly replaced by the clipped, efficient tone of a remote project manager. The silence was a vacuum, and my own anxieties rushed in to fill it. The final confirmation of the wire transfer arrived in my email, a sterile, automated message from the bank's fraud department. It was a standard notice, but one line was flagged for my attention. Beneficiary name Jocelyn Magpante does not match the provided Joyce. The transaction was processed as requested, but please be advised. Jocelyn. The name was alien. I reread our old chats, searching for any mention of it. Nothing. It was a splinter under my fingernail, a tiny, sharp point of wrongness that I couldn't ignore, a loose thread on a perfectly woven tapestry. My heart began to pound a frantic, irregular rhythm. My fingers trembled as I typed Jocelyn Magpante into the Facebook search bar. Dozens of profiles appeared, but one had a familiar face in the profile picture. It was her cousin, the one who needed the safety certification. I clicked on his profile. It was public. I scrolled through his photos, my breath held tight in my chest. There were pictures of him with Joyce, but in every one she was standing next to another man, a local guy about her age, with his arm draped possessively around her shoulder. In one photo, they were holding a small child. The world began to tilt on its axis. I was scrolling through a life I had never known existed, a parallel reality where I was not the romantic lead. It was a feed of family birthdays, christenings, and holidays, a life that was whole and complete without me. The Sari Sari store wasn't there. The bungalows weren't there. There was only this man, this child, this family. My investment, my grand gesture, my entire future was nowhere to be seen. The curtain hadn't just fallen, it had been ripped away, revealing a stage that was completely bare, the actors long gone. Then I saw it. The most recent post from just 3 days ago. It was an album of photos from a party. There were dozens of people, plates of food, a karaoke machine. The caption, written in Tagalog, was Isang Pagdiriwang para sa aming bagong buhay, a celebration for our new life. I clicked on the first photo in the album. It was Jocelyn, my Joyce, standing next to her husband and their 2 children. They were all grinning wildly, holding up a huge hand-painted sign between them. It was sloppy, written in bright red letters, and it was pointed directly at the camera. It said, "Thank you, John Miller." The screen froze on that grinning, triumphant sign. For a full minute, I did nothing. I just stared, my brain refusing to process the image, trying to fit it into the movie I had been living in. It had to be a joke, a terrible, cruel prank they were playing on me. I tried her number, the one that had been my lifeline for almost a year. It rang once, then went straight to a recorded message in a language I couldn't understand. I tried her cousin, her brother, anyone. Every call met the same digital wall. The world hadn't just gone silent. It had ceased to exist, replaced by a single, mocking JPEG image that served as its tombstone. My hands, slick with a cold sweat, fumbled to log into my bank account. The numbers on the screen were stark and brutal, stripped of all fantasy. The six-figure balance that had represented 40 years of discipline, of waking up at dawn, of a life lived by the rules, was gone. The reservoir wasn't just empty. The dam itself had been demolished, leaving nothing but a dried, cracked riverbed. What remained was a paltry sum, less than what I used to spend on a weekend getaway. I was a shipwreck survivor who had finally washed ashore, only to find the island was a barren rock, with the wreckage of my life's work a distant, sinking shadow on the horizon. When I finally managed to get a taxi to her family's village, the atmosphere was glacial. The warm smiles I remembered were replaced with hard, unblinking stares. Joyce's father, the man whose debt of honor I had paid, stood in the doorway of the house I had repaired and simply shook his head, a smirk playing on his lips. Her mother muttered something in Tagalog to a neighbor, followed by a cruel laugh that echoed in the humid air. They were no longer the grateful family I had saved. They were a board of directors who had just concluded a successful and final business transaction. There was no anger or drama, just the cold, dismissive finality of a deal closed. The eviction wasn't a formal process. It was a quiet, suffocating humiliation. Her brother, the one whose education I had funded, helped me pack my 2 suitcases, his movements efficient and devoid of any emotion. I was a guest whose stay had expired. As I walked down the dirt road toward the main highway, dragging my belongings behind me, the villagers watched. There was no pity in their eyes, only a detached curiosity, the way you'd watch a stray dog being chased out of town. I was no longer Sir John, the respected American. I was just another ghost, a walking story they would tell their children about the foolish old man who thought he could buy a dream. Standing in the departure terminal of the Manila airport, I felt like a specter haunting the scene of my own murder. This was the exact spot where she had run into my arms, where her embrace had promised a new life. The air was still thick with the same jet fuel and humidity, but the hope that had once filled my lungs was replaced by the hollow ache of absolute loss. I was a man who had sold his entire world for a fantasy, and now I was returning with nothing but the clothes on my back and a one-way ticket to a life I no longer recognized. I wasn't the hero of the story coming home. I was just the fool, finally being sent away. If you're sitting there right now, a man my age, lonely and staring at a screen, talking to a beautiful young woman from halfway across the world, I need you to listen to me. I was you. I know the feeling. It's like a drug, that feeling of being seen again after years of being invisible. Let me ask you something. Does she make you feel like a king? Does she hang on your every word? That feeling, that intoxicating rush, isn't a connection, it's a transaction. Your loneliness is the product she's buying, and your hope is the currency she demands. I can write down the playbook for you because I bought every single page of it with my life savings. It begins with the small emergencies, the sick mother, the brother's tuition. These are not crises, they are tests to see if the ATM is working. Then comes the business proposal, the plan for your future together, which is just a way to sink your capital into something you will never own. She will isolate you from anyone who questions her, calling them jealous. The final move is always the property, the house built in her name because a foreigner can't own land. My dream is dead, and it took every penny I ever saved with it. All that I have left is this story, and I am telling it for you. Think of me as a lighthouse, a structure built on the jagged rocks of my own shipwreck. My entire purpose now is to cast a beam of light on the dangers that are hiding just beneath the warm, beautiful surface of that water. I am the ghost of the man you are about to become. Before you liquidate your life, before you wire that investment, look at my ruin. This is the destination you are heading towards. Turn the ship around.